Welcome, everybody. These are our occasional webinars that we do where we just try and share some expert knowledge. So we get the best people external to us, sometimes ourselves, to come and speak about something that they are expert in. So we have Ian Daniels. Ian Daniels, I think, knows anybody who's looked at anything to do with any form of digital marketing over the past couple of decades. Was it 20 years in SEO or thereabouts, which makes him absolutely, definitely an OG. 15 years in Adobe. Would that be correct, Ian?
That is correct. Yeah, ever since Adobe purchased Omniture Site Catalyst in 2009, I've worked as an Adobe partner and all of the wonderful growing pains of doing such.
And Ian does the bits of the Adobe suite, as it were, that we don't necessarily do, because we do the commerce piece. So we have very many conversations, and certainly amongst the very, very best in the business at what he does. And also one of the most pleasant people you could possibly ever go for a pint with. Running your own agency now, I think you were saying something like 25 staff, so great size business and absolutely expert. We will be recording this. I urge you to think of questions as we are going through this. We're going to be talking about stuff. This is the really precise definition. Stuff that the Adobe Suite does. We're going to be talking about content, supply chain, and a whole bunch of acronyms. So I'm going to say thank you for now. We'll take questions at the end. Throw things into the meeting chat if you need to. Ian, over to you.
Marvelous. Well, I will share my screen and take it you can all see that.
It's there.
Marvelous. Yeah, so today's content is partly brought to you by Adobe Firefly, which we'll talk about a little bit through this presentation. When Simon put me on the spot and said, come to a webinar, I came up with the rather ridiculous title of Over the Edge and Into Platform, which is an inside look at the next gen of Adobe's marketing technology and what it can do for you and what it does. So most of you are probably familiar with Adobe. Everybody's familiar with Adobe from the Creative Cloud. So since they were founded in 1982 by two doctors that wanted to, create a creative environment that they could, enjoy the workplace and have created a great culture. They, started with the Creative Cloud, and quite quickly accelerated into the Document Cloud. Everybody's familiar with Acrobat. Still a surprisingly large part of Adobe's over 100 billion market cap and ridiculous revenue. That's Adobe Sign, Acrobat, and all of the document products in that. But today we're going to be talking about the Experience Cloud. And Experience Cloud has been around since that kind of early 2000s. And it's changed massively in the last 5-6 years. So that's the reason of putting this together today, because there are a huge amount of acronyms and kind of go-to-market collective kind of strategies and use cases that Adobe are bringing out, and they're actually working really well, delivering value for businesses, and it's wonderful as someone that's been dragged along from the individual acquisitions and integration days through to this ground-up sort of future state platform that we have today. So before we dive into the today and the future, let's have a little bit of a level set on where we've come from. So this was the Adobe Experience Cloud just 6 years ago in 2018. So that was just after Magento was acquired and announced. So there was 3 clouds: the Analytics Cloud, Marketing Cloud, and Commerce Cloud. They were very separate. There was no real integration between this suite. This was early stage of core services, which were the sort of links between the different applications. So there was still a lot of consultancy that the team I worked with then did to make data flow between the systems. All of the data models were different because they were different acquisitions. Adobe Campaign was Nearlane, Adobe Analytics was Omniture Site Catalyst. Adobe Target was Exact Target. Experience Manager was IQ. So, similar to Salesforce and some of the other tech giants, they initially grew the Marketing Cloud through acquisition. But thankfully, after Shantanu sort of took over as CEO and the CTO at the time, they decided they wanted to rebuild from the ground up. And this is about 7 years ago now. So that's when the Adobe Experience Platform started being built. There was a widely missed collaboration between Microsoft, SAP, and many other large tech players called the Open Data Initiative. And this is where they got together and agreed an interoperable set of schemas to map out common data objects within marketing technology, within different verticals and standard kind of business operating models. And that was part of what led to the foundation of the underlying data modeling platform. And why this was such a step change, it meant that suddenly, rather than integrating and translating different systems that spoke different languages, that were structured from different ways, all of a sudden you've got one common data model, one common language, and an open set of APIs, front and back end, to pipe all manner of research and development through, and that led to what is now the Experience Platform, and the majority of this portfolio sort of sit on top of it. And increasingly, the sort of the legacy parts of the Adobe stack, whilst they're still very useful, and unlike Google, for example, they have no plans to sunset Adobe Analytics, the classic model. It should just get more accessible, lower price point. It won't get all the fancy bells and whistles of all the Gen AI, but it's not going away anytime soon. But interestingly, this has led to a rise in use cases, go-to-markets, as Adobe call them in the American software language. So they realized that a lot of the use cases their customers were putting this previous technology and now the newer technology to were kind of grouped in these ways. So rather than just the channels of data insights activation, the marketing planning, the content and commerce and customer journeys, they developed about 3 years ago now, they developed these personalized insights and engagement. So PI, that's one acronym that we'll talk about today. And PI is where we do a lot of our consulting time. And this kind of covers off the analytics offerings. That's Adobe Analytics, new customer journey analytics, the real-time CDP, Adobe Target, any of the customer journey tools. So we do a lot with Campaign and Journey Optimizer and a little bit of Marketo. But then interestingly, commerce is there, since commerce has been brought into the fold more. So that's quite interesting. So they started selling lots of multi-solution deals, and which meant that customers were going, well, we want these use cases. So when we work with Adobe, we will use all of these different applications. And similarly, they'd seen the growth in what Adobe termed the content supply chain. And it's probably 2 or 3 summits ago now that they first sort of put their stamp on it, probably 3 after they acquired Workfront. So Workfront was an enterprise work management platform that they acquired for a few billion dollars. And as they've started to integrate the rest of the Adobe Experience Cloud into Workfront, they've also been able to bring the wider clouds that we looked at the beginning together. So Document Cloud and Creative Cloud have also been brought together. So whilst within the Experience Cloud, the content supply chain would be powered by Adobe Workfront, Adobe Experience Manager Assets in particular is super key to the heart of the content supply chain, but also Experience Manager Sites, Customer Journey Analytics, which has a new content analytics module that we'll talk about in a bit as we go through the presentation, and Adobe Target and Adobe Commerce. So Adobe Commerce is in both of these sort of key go-to-markets. So as Simon will attest, the interest and the momentum around the enterprise side of the Adobe Commerce platform has really started to grow as Adobe have been sort of pushing this messaging. You get a lot of commerce plus PI, commerce plus content supply chain talked about in the halls of Adobe when you're navigating all the sort of different parts of the process of working with their customers. And this is really interesting. So you can see that the acquisition of Workfront, whilst it's given them a really strong foothold, like it did when they acquired Marketo, which the install base for B2B marketing automation for Marketo was huge. Workfront was the same. In the US, it absolutely proliferated. And, even though there's competitors like Rike and Workday and Compost and many others, Workfront was already an established enterprise player. Not so much in Europe, but it's really sort of gained traction. What's really interesting is it really brings in the creation and production part of the Adobe world, which is huge, and the community around the Creative Cloud, around Photoshop and InDesign, the enthusiasm around Frame.io since they acquired that, and custom Firefly models that they've built to sort of power their generative AI push is really fascinating. It's unlocked a lot more use cases within the activation side, which is typically where we play, which is in that experience cloud. So really, it was that acquisition of Workfront on top of building platform from the ground up that has led to this kind of really nice innovation stage where Adobe really are at the top of their game compared to a lot of other cloud players in the market. Yes, there's point solutions that will do all sort of manner of weird and wonderful things for specific sectors or use cases, but genuinely, as someone who's worked alongside marketing technology in all its shapes and sizes for the last 15 years with primarily Adobe, but all of the other overlap in the technology space, it really is quite an exciting time to be an Adobe partner. And with customer journey analytics, which was the next evolution of moving analytics onto the consolidated platform model, we've now got content analytics, which is in beta at the moment. General releases should be by the end of the year or beginning of FY25. It's fascinating. It closes the loop. It ties it all together. You're able to, and we'll talk about it in a bit more detail, but it gives you the attribution around every single atomic piece of the content supply chain, loops it right back through all the campaign delivery, the measurement throughout. And that's really fascinating to see the three clouds kind of come together. So one of the innovations that we'll start off at the top, and I think this is kind of explains a little bit more about why the worlds of commerce and Experience Manager, AEM, the sites and assets stack are coming closer together, and why they're typically also crossing over into the pie and content supply chain space. Is this next generation of speed and performance, EDS? You'll hear that acronym quite a lot in the coming months from Adobe. Edge Delivery Service. All the images, by the way, are Firefly generated. I love the fact that someone who's always last minute putting content together can just go and ask a generative AI model to produce something for him. So thank you, Adobe. So EDS, Edge Delivery Service, is very much an evolution of, again, Adobe have pretty much built AEM from the ground up. Whilst the back end still has a lot of elements and structurally ways of thinking about content composition and composability that CQ had and AM has had for years. It really is a part of the evolution as it's moved more to an API first, and they wanted to really keep up with the evolving trends in the development space. So there's a huge push to headless. There's been a lot of interest in different front end frameworks. Lots of highly performant, lightweight front-end frameworks that there are lots of developers that want to work in, and having to constrain them to, the headful way of building within Adobe's languages was a bit restrictive to their growth. So again, they've done a really good job with this, and Edge Delivery Services is one of the side effects that I think is going to have one of the biggest impacts in the wider adoption. So essentially, it's been built out of, to start with, it benefits from the Microsoft partnership. So it's always very interesting to know that the CEO of Microsoft and the CEO of Adobe were at school together, Hyderabad Public School, apparently one of the best private schools in the world. So they've known each other for years. They say it's a coincidence, but they've since both taking over the helms in the mid 2000s of the two tech giants. They've increasingly, even though they have competitive overlap, they've increasingly joined forces and tightened their positioning together. So the edge network that Adobe is now federating a lot of their systems out across is powered by Azure. It does play on AWS as well. They are supportive of most cloud platforms. But what it essentially means is that it gives you flexibility of authoring to start with. So you can use your standard kind of WYSIWYG interface. You can do headless authoring, and more recently they've supported this kind of document authoring. So non-technical users can create a document in Word or Google Docs, any sort of Office software of their choice, and that can essentially be published on the web. You can also run all of these different authoring models side by side, so you can gradually migrate. It's a fascinating way to decouple the back end of a content management system from the front end and really give users that power. So one of the high impacts of the move to the edge delivery service, the Adobe engineers claim they work quite closely with the Google engineers who authored around the sort of content web vitals and worked on the Lighthouse score within the kind of Chrome dev tools. And one of the big sort of performance markers that they can show, other than your own kind of measuring, is those kind of Lighthouse scores and performance. And Adobe was one of the early case studies. You can see here their performance went straight to 100, and pretty much every new build when it goes live that I've seen rebuilt over edge delivery can achieve 100 scores in performance and SEO within the Lighthouse measures. They're not the be all and end all. It's very much one small component of a large and complex piece, as PushON, who still actively wrangle in the SEO space, will tell you. But it's certainly a really nice competitive advantage to come out of the box working at that kind of speed. Now, what's really interesting is that there's now thousands of sites that have adopted this. Obviously, a lot of them are in the US, but it's consistently fast. So they're seeing this on launch, on adoption of edge delivery service as a method of serving the content, across different industries, different sectors. It's fantastically fast. This is publicly available data. I've checked Adobe's. It does go down. So it also design and development principles have a big part to play. If you don't continue to build in a performant and consistent manner, you obviously can impact that score. There's only so much a delivery system could do. It's essentially a CDN on steroids. But what's really interesting to me is that this is now an add-on component or SKU or product that you can add on to commerce. So you can now there's three kind of models of it. There's a whole bunch of boilerplate template stuff that's been built already to service it. There is a bunch of product detail page, product listing page, all of the kind of standard templates you would want that you can drag and drop to build a storefront. You can build lightning fast mobile storefronts, and then you can also build custom components as well. But again, you could author you could build the front end of commerce now entirely in whatever framework you want, powered by edge delivery services. And then we start to see how that is another way of really connecting both of those experience layers into the wider stack. So personalized insights and engagement, we touched on that at the beginning. These use cases, as you see, they're all inherently focused on those experience layers. So whether it's your website that might be in AEM, or the commerce journey that's in Magento or Adobe Commerce. So leveraging things like an actual real-time CDP because of Edge and how it works, and the ability to sit the personalization engine Target on top of that. They've also now integrated Target into AEM, so you don't actually need Target. You've got native testing and experimentation available within sites. It's still Target, but it's there. They've got abandoned basket campaigns that are now intelligent re-engagement. So being able to actually bring in offline signals that might stop you from bombarding a customer who's abandoned, just say, did you forget something 100 times, when actually what they did was go in store and try it on and purchase it. So being able to close the loop on some of those browse online, buy in store journeys is really interesting. Churn, again, just having those offline signals in customer journey analytics and fed into audiences in a CDP means that your messaging is just slightly more correct. And I think all of the standard metrics that you might want to try and move, whether it is average order value, lifetime value, looking at different macro and micro conversions, the better view of data you have associated to a customer profile, the better decisioning you can make. So it's really just, again, better connectivity of data leading to better outcomes. And because a lot of that is happening on those presentation layers of AEM sites, the app store library and commerce, you can see why a lot of the sort of pie products are starting to be adopted by commerce customers. They do have a third use case, but I don't talk about it separately because it's customer acquisition. And I think any business that's operating a commerce offering in any way, or in a service business, or even in a lot of the B2B space is doing customer acquisition. They're spending money on advertising, they're creating personalized experiences or messaging, customer comms. But what's really interesting with the Adobe customer acquisition use case is that on top of this single data lake, the structure of schemas and audiences and profiles, all of this wonderful, rich way of understanding the interactions with your experience layers, they can start to make more intelligent models. They can start to train some of their generative AI and machine learning. So mixed modeler is a sort of next step on from multi-touch attribution. It brings media mix modeling and some of the kind of more econometric offline ways of looking at data sets into the platform. So you can bring in your offline data, you can stitch together a variety of different channel activity, and then that allows you to run and test scenarios like what would happen if I turned off all my marketing spend. All those sorts of things can be answered. But it also pulls in things like the creative. So the Gen Studio, which is coming soon, we'll talk about that in a minute. That gives you the ability to generate and test infinite variations. And with a very large financial services brand, we had fantastic results by using both generative AI for visual ads on social, but also just simple generative AI copy variations for long tail PPC. So really practical, simple applications, but you can really get a virtuous circle, and all of these applications are sitting on top of platform. So their customer acquisition is kind of evolving into that more first party data and leveraging some generative AI. You can see that they've onboarded a whole number of kind of industry data partners. So if businesses that work with large agencies can typically access all of those custom data platforms, all of those customer attributes that are available to leverage and target. You can bring those on. And the measurement, I think, is for me is the place that the biggest developments come, which is that content analytics module. So without content analytics previously, you were very much in the dark in how individual components and creative in ad campaigns were performing, the variations in how they impacted interest or fatigue of customers. So the launch of that, as well as product analytics, which has enabled a lot of development in that kind of product experimentation mindset. So the customer journey analytics now covers off some really growing areas of interest, product analytics and this combining of the content supply chain into the Experience Cloud. Content analytics, it's like I say, beta at the moment, should be out soon. There's a number of early adopters. It's been great from what we've seen. Because it's on platform, the AI is able to train across the entire data set of the CDP, of the customer profiles that are activating Journey Optimizer, the personalized experiences in Target, and tied right back to that briefing, planning, design, the creative creation. So every single piece of the puzzle that the creative agency or in-house studio generates. So it really is a step change in how you view the end-to-end life cycle of a campaign, and I think that's going to be one of the big drivers next year for people that are familiar with Adobe Analytics to go, oh, hey, customer journey analytics now has a really killer reason to look at adoption. I thought I turned off all these annoying transitions. So content supply chain. So what does Adobe mean by that? So they simply state the content supply chain is the end-to-end process companies use to deliver content for their marketing campaigns and personalized customer experiences, which is everything we've just been talking about. So all of the marketing that customers are already doing is suddenly got an umbrella term for how you extend out the data collection, manage the resources that are input, both budgetary, internal resource with logging time against the campaign creation, and then reporting back on the actual performance of all of the different components of the campaigns as they go live. And I think that's really what changes here. The fundamental marketing is still the same. It's just better informed and easily reported. And this horrendous spaghetti diagram that Adobe love to show is, that really shows what a lot of large organizations' marketing planning and process really looks like. Bit of a mess. And it really does slow down the time to the time to execute on campaigns. Standardizing and ordering it all through Workfront, and having only in this last 18 months started to work on big multi-solution implementations that have Workfront at the heart. It really is fascinating to me how many business processes get mapped into that, and there's a bit of sense of order and understanding and a bit more sort of governance and reassurance that comes out of that process. And back to that slide that we looked at the beginning, it really is leveraging those kind of integrations between the applications. Most of the business process for campaign planning comes from that Creative Cloud. The workflow planning and mapping in governance and the supply chain piece from Workfront, and obviously the execution from all of the channels that we talked about. But asset management at the middle being a key. So Gen Studio and the content hub that sits within it is, something that we'll touch on briefly in a minute. That's going live imminently, again in beta. It pulls all of this together, and you start to see that virtuous circle with the content analytics enabling it really does change how teams collaborate. So there's been a lot of buzz about Gen AI. I think they say 1.8 trillion or something the industry's now being valued at. It's ridiculous. There's a lot of early adoption and bad practice out there. But there's also some measured and practical use cases like the social advertising and long tail PPC I mentioned earlier. But Adobe very much views Gen AI as a co-pilot and talk about strategically rolling out kind of low empathy tasks to have that heavy lifting carried up. So a lot of the AI assistant work within platform is just simply, reminding a user how to do something, where to find something, suggesting a campaign to start from when a brief matches one that's happened before. So, there's lots of elements of these different stages of all of the marketing campaigns that we've just been talking through, all of the ways that technology is used, that can be supported by Gen AI. Can't leave it alone. Not for a second. Adobe say the maturity scale looks a little bit like, what I tend to do on the left, crawling. Just a lot of companies are only ready for that. Some are in the middle, walking. They've started to connect a lot of their assets, and we've got a client that's starting to do asset versioning with Firefly. Gen AI copy creation is getting better. It's still really only as good as the campaigns that you've trained on. So if you've always done crap campaigns, you're going to get a terrible recommendation. Very few are running. A lot are walking towards that at the moment. I mean, Adobe themselves are probably the closest to having fully adopted it. And it's quite an interesting space to watch, as I think it will increase the value that marketers are able to achieve. So there's a QR code in here, and this has been recorded and be shared, or you can scan it if you're super interested. This is the landing page on Adobe for Gen Studio because it is imminent. It's coming. It's in beta at the moment. And what this essentially does is it wraps all of the things that we've just been talking about, the enterprise governance of Workfront and the baked-in provenance metadata of Firefly generated assets, the trackability of content analytics, the auditability that then gives you in your Workfront or your assets. It brings assets which typically didn't have a great UI. It was an enterprise DAM. It has been developed a lot. It now has some very smart AI for building the metadata, the heart of the searchability of all the attributes of the assets that are created. But this Gen Studio just gives you that consolidated UI. It gives you that marketer workflow interface that kind of moves a bit like Platform does. It moves a lot of the technical requirements out of the hands of the end user, which is, it's usually leads to greater adoption. And then finally, this is the geeky one. This is the one I like. I mean, you've had federated data access in Adobe Campaign Classic, which is a super powerful tool for years. But Adobe very smartly realized that, there was a huge development in the data management space in enterprises. So if we look at the timeline, the evolution of audiences, I love this because right at the beginning, distributed audiences back in 2013 when everything was very separate, and did a lot of work scripting target to speak to analytics backwards and forwards. And core services came out in 2016, and those leveraged some of the infrastructure of the DMP and the Demdex that Adobe acquired, an audience manager, and the visitor ID service became sort of part of that. Audiences and profiles were slightly more useful. 2019, as platform first emerged, you had the profile service. It was very much in its infancy and has changed dramatically since then. Like, they binned off the device co-op and, have moved into something I'll show you in a minute that I think is wonderful for the future. The audience portal composition, which then replaced it when people started adopting multiple platform applications, when Journey Optimizer and Customer Journey Analytics came out. And then finally now, audiences with Enterprise Data Warehouse. So this is the federated data warehouse move. So as someone that's worked in the CDP space for a number of years and often will review CDPs when clients are making decisions on what they should choose or how they should shortlist for an RFP, there was a bit of a move when IT suddenly said, hey, we've invested previously in these big data warehouse projects, and we want to leverage that by just putting that an execution layer, activation layer on top of our existing data warehouse investment. Why do we need a full CDP to copy all the data across? So there was a rise of composable CDPs, and some CDP vendors would unhook or uncouple some of their components, capabilities like the ID graph or the data lake, and allow you to chop and change, and then IT would feel like they were getting a better value purchase. But actually, it was kind of the kind of wrong way to think about it. Should optimize the data really, and actually there's a whole bunch of use case patterns that it's like, yes, creating new audiences from enterprise data without needing to share sensitive data. So things like policy management systems in insurance, we started to do this, seeing it in practice management systems, for vets, where you want to access certain attributes and audiences, but you don't want to share or move or anyway expose the underlying data. Audience enrichment, where you do want to keep some attributes in the profile. That's a super common use case. And then enriching those profiles within the activation path. So being able to choose any of those options and reach out into a Snowflake instance, which is super common for our use cases, soon to support Databricks as well, but Azure and AWS, all of those have integration points. Being able to map that data with low to no copy and not keep any data in, or move data for no reason, I think is super smart move for Adobe. Goes way beyond composable, and federated audience access, or FACT as they don't acronym it, is super interesting. It's newly out, and there's some nice future further resources there to look at. But yeah, I think, whilst that was a very whistle-stop tour, the final thing that I'll close with is I've managed to get it to pretty much the 30 minutes that Master Simon requested. This is a high-level architectural overview of the experience platform and the applications. And I think what is really fascinating here is that over time, it's gone from CDP, which was the core application when platform was built. It wasn't accessible to anyone other than the deepest pockets of enterprise. But as use cases have increased, and over the last 6 years now since it's been live, a lot of use cases for Journey Optimizer and Customer Journey Analytics, they needed the CDP components. So any of these applications that you've got, you're effectively accessing the real-time customer profile, the identity graph and the identity store. So Customer Journey Analytics, even on its own, without CDP or Journey Optimizer, now is one of the most robust views of customer data you can have, because you can bring offline data sources and other digital data sources in and stitch them in data views. Fascinating how the governance and privacy and security, it just has to exist. So you're able to build, fully compliant journeys. You're able to manage data selections. So I think we will see, and I know that there are discussions at the moment around how these products are packaged going forward, but I think we will see CDP move a bit more quietly into the background, and a lot more kind of use case and activation around Journey Optimizer and Customer Journey Analytics will become much more common and will cover off 80-90%. And unless you have an absolute killer real-time, in-the-moment activation use case, you're going to get everything you need from just those single applications. So I think that's a really fascinating development. Obviously, the platform has the edge network sat atop it, so we will see more and more improvements in performance across the board as that service is more widely adopted. So, a really exciting time to be working around Adobe technology. And yeah, thank you very much for listening to me. For those of you that want to talk more, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. QR code will link there. And yeah, if there's any questions, I would be delighted to answer some.
Thank you very much for that, Ian. That's a lot
Yeah,
going on.
there's a lot going on. It was 30 minutes. I said I'd get to 30 minutes. We covered all the acronyms.
So I've been trying to sort of like encourage people to ask some difficult questions, and I think people are typing away there. Our mutual colleague Russ I noticed has joined us as well, so I'm hopefully going to push him into asking something pithy. But I'll start off with these are fairly big systems. What's the nature of the organisation that can realistically expect to deploy something like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are very lean teams adopting this. So, implementing a hotel group, and whilst the hotel group is large, their marketing team is tiny. I think they've got 2 on the CRM team, one who covers kind of analytics and supports the actual marketers. And they're planning to be self-sufficient and run and operate with Journey Optimizer and CGA. So the team can be lean, but obviously the size of the business needs to see the return to invest in what it costs. I'd say the price point has come down a lot. Like Adobe, they've got enough scale in these new platforms now that there are accessible entry-level, smaller volume SKUs, which is good. You'd be surprised at some of the prices that are out there. So I won't say them all things have been recorded, but it's the ceiling of entry is not as high as it used to be.
Cool, thank you very much. Chris Palmer asks, how easily can the edge delivery services be retrofitted into existing mature platforms versus starting from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main win there is that multiple authoring supported concurrently means that you can move it bit by bit. You don't need to start from scratch unless your system is completely broken or comes with a bunch of customization and legacy tech debt that is worth getting rid of. Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're working on a joint project with PushON where all of the sites, the content part of the sites are being lifted and shifted into EDS straight away, but commerce will go live as it's been built, and then the front end of that will be moved into over edge delivery services bit by bit. So it's quite easy because it supports those multiple authoring models.
Cool. And my how can I put this? Finance cautious co-founder Roy asks, there's so much here to understand and learn. What's the best, open brackets, free, close brackets, way to get some hands-on experience and a taste of how it all fits together?
Well, very conveniently, Adobe have realized that people want to do that. So the GitHub repository for the AEM Edge Delivery Services is publicly facing. You can go and do publicly facing training. If you're a partner, there's slightly more involved internal training that doesn't have a cost. But you can essentially fork off a branch and spin up your own AEM instance project and actually go and build a site. Some of our guys are on a boot camp at the moment, and they've been building pages and components within minutes. So there's a lot out there. I'll see if I can find the link and drop it in the chat.
That'd be really useful, and we are going to send out this. If we can share your deck as well, we'll send it out alongside video of this and make it available probably next week if we can bully Roy into getting that done. Let me see. Our mutual drinking colleague Ned asks, if a business is already fairly set up in an Adobe Analytics stack, do you see any other reasons they shouldn't embrace everything that Adobe marketing tools offer?
I would say, firstly, just adopting CJA, Customer Journey Analytics, would get them a first step onto platform. And at the moment, I don't know how long it will last, but at the moment, those adopting Customer Journey Analytics that are existing Adobe Analytics customers are having Adobe Analytics discounted to 100% and kept for a period that's agreed between Adobe and the client to make sure that they have full financial year coverage. So that could be a couple of years, for example. And the incremental cost is typically quite low if you're not bringing in massive amounts of offline data. If you are, that scales. So that's a really easy, cost-neutral way to get onto platform. And then suddenly things like Journey Optimizer become quite interesting, as if people are using a .digital or some other kind of capable but mid price point kind of platform, then actually the incremental jump is not that big. Considering with Journey Optimizer, you actually get most of the capabilities of Target as well as the capabilities of Campaign. It's quite interesting. So if it was my budget, that's probably how I would phase it. I would go, I've got Adobe Analytics, I love it. If I move in those steps, I get the best of 3 or 4 other things I could buy separately with only needing to adopt 2 and only pay for 1 effectively.
Very nice. Russ, have you looked into product analytics, and how do you see that sitting alongside CGAA behavioral analytics? And he has a subsequent piece there. I asked him for difficult questions and he hasn't disappointed. Do you see much conflict within businesses that have a data lake, mart and tech teams that want to keep all their data in their own back garden? What's the best way you've navigated this scenario?
Yeah, product analytics was, I think, it was a bit of a US niche response to a very growing market. I think when Adam Greco, went from being the Adobe evangelist to the product analytics evangelist, and moved across, I think that kind of got on the radar of the product teams. Adobe put a lot of work into product analytics. It's not been widely adopted in the UK. The additional cost versus value, if you've already got a product team that have got even something like a mixed panel of their choice, it's quite hard to get product teams to move. It's capable, it does the job. I think it tends to work in isolation if the product teams do adopt it. There's not much bleed over into marketing unless you get a product owner that sits with SEO, for example. There's only time I've seen crossover. I think content analytics will be a bigger step change because it opens up more use cases. Definitely conflict with data lake, data mart, lakehouse kind of proponents in IT that want to own their data. And again, I mean, it's that kind of consultative process around, if you want these future state use cases, this data needs to be accessible to the profile. These are the options that you have to do that. And I think that the federated audience, federated audience composition is one new route to try and address those concerns. But quite brutally, the biggest way that we see change in any of these contested areas is you have to get top-down buy-in, and it needs to be a mandate from the CEO, CFO, CIO, whoever has the right clout in the business to affect that change. Otherwise, you'll stand it up and walk away, and they'll go back to squabbling in silos, quite honestly.
And one from Chris here. Adobe's B2B account structures are coming soon, or so we hear. How is the analytics and marketing tech adopting to accommodate that different approach of how and when you talk to a company versus an individual?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of customers on the beta of this, and at the moment, annoyingly, it still involves Marketo for some of the account-based marketing workflows and some of the execution. At the moment, essentially, it's an extra data layer field within the Journey Optimizer profile that allows you to then map one to many, many to one to build those, those structures of how you want to communicate appropriately. The work is ongoing to rapidly move the whole workflow into platform. So pretty soon, it will just be like CDP is a B2B flavor of Journey Optimizer coupled with a B2B flavor of CDP to answer that kind of use case. And it kind of works at the moment. I mean, I'd rather not have to work on Marketo, quite honestly, but I mean, it's still got an SEO tab that gives you keywords or tries to. It's not a product that's had much development, but yeah, it is. It's there. It's soon to be better, I would say. If I didn't massively need to adopt it prior to it all being on platform, I would check in on that roadmap and see if it was coming soon.
So, any more quite quickly? I see Steve is typing. Let's see if we can get something out quickly. Oh, you're going to press send there, Steve.
Well, Steve's typing that. I think Simon, like that point around commerce being, covered in every touch point of these new ways of bundling use cases and applications together is really interesting for your business. As I expect the conversations will quite quickly increase around that side of things. I mean, at the moment, previously there was such a independence of Magento in the community from Adobe that is maybe now moving in a direction that might be quite interesting.
Yeah, we certainly see it as that way, the way that we can mesh the whole suite together and make much more compelling offering. I think it's powerful times. We see across the board indicators as that next year is going to be a much more powerful year. Market's been flat for about 2 years. We're seeing growth at the moment. So I think the early adopters next year are going to start seeing the benefit quicker than others. I think there's pent up demand at the moment. So the timing of what Adobe's got out there, I think, is intriguing. And I think Steve's going to be way too late for this now. So I am going to say thank you very much, Ian. It's exactly what I was looking for, how we all pull this together. Thank you, everybody who's come along. Please tell people about these events that we do. We've got another one coming up in about 2 weeks, which will be MailChimp, who have a very compelling offering as well. We will send out information about that fairly soon. We'll make this available via our website, via LinkedIn. Feel free to pass it on to people. And if you've got any questions, if you want any introductions, I'm sure some of you will be desperate to speak to Ian. We will put you in touch if you want us to. So thank you very much. And we'll call it a day at this point. Connor, press the switch.